Welcome to The Kingstonian, a podcast that profiles people who are passionate about what they do for a living, what organization they belong to, or the community they are a part of. Here is your host, Dave Cunningham.
Thank you, Steve. Hello there and welcome. 45 years ago this month, Tony Orr moved to Kingston and started his long career as a radio newsman in the city, spending 24 years at CKLC Y98 and then another 20 years at KROCK Country 93.5. Over the years, listeners came to rely on Tony for live coverage of everything local in his newscasts. From the infamous ice storm to the magnificent tall ships, he made sure stories were covered from every angle. And the people he had conversations with, people who were visiting our city or others who had been lifelong residents. Along the way, Tony set down roots in his new community by getting involved in organizations focused on education, community health, and local business. For almost 45 years, he's been telling stories, and in this episode, he shares some of them with us. This conversation was recorded virtually, and be aware we had a little technical difficulty towards the end. Regardless, I think you will enjoy this episode. Here is our chat with Tony Orr. Tony, welcome to the program.
Well, thank you for inviting me.
One thing I want to start off with, and this is a question I ask folks who have a schedule that they have lived by for years in terms of their day and the start time of their day. You've spent 40 plus years, a good chunk of that being a morning news person. Has your body become accustomed to not having to get up at some ungodly hour, or do you still get up at that hour?
No, I don't get up at 3:30 in the morning. It was usually 3:15, and by the time I sort of got moving, 3:30. I still get up fairly early in the morning. I like to be up when the sun comes up, kind of idea, but not when it's too early in the summertime. I'm usually up 6:30 or so.
Now, were you the kind of guy that comes home and has a nap and then stays up a little later, or were you going to bed at a reasonable hour, given you're getting up at 3:15?
No, I would have to be in bed by 8:15 at night, or 8:30 at the latest, usually. Mm-hmm. If I was going to a public event, then I'd try and catch some sleep and then do that. But for the last 20 years almost, I had two jobs, so would work most of the day. I would start out at 3:30 in the morning and get home at 5:30 at night.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes,
it's a long day.
Sometimes later when I was teaching.
For those people who live outside the city or the province or the country for that matter and may not know who you are or what you did for a living for as long as you did, why don't we talk a little bit about morning news on radio and what's that like? What kinds of things would you be doing in the morning to get ready? What would be the expectation of your listener at 7:30 or 8 o'clock when they were looking for you?
Yes, well, actually, we for about the past 20 years, I was doing my first newscast at 5:30 in the morning. So people, that's why I started as early as I did, because people got to rely on that as their first hit of information before they got ready to get on the go. A lot of people commuting early in the morning, I found. So it was a matter of doing all kinds of research, some of it done the day before, making phone calls to police and fire and sometimes ambulance, any of the contacts that I had, and of course going through all the news releases from the day before. And for the past 20 years or so, I was a one-person operation, so it was an extensive amount of preparation work to get it all done. But I figured out a way to do it and be able to handle it, and I loved being able to do that. It was just something that I felt was a use useful for people, and people told me that it was what they wanted to hear, and it was all local. I did not. To some people weren't happy with the fact inside the building that I worked in, but I almost always avoided other news outside of what was going on in this community. So it was pretty intense that way.
I think that's probably a big point. I know that I did one of these episodes with Doug Jeffries, who does sports, and that was his point as well, is focusing on the local, making sure people knew who was doing what in their own community. And I think that's probably why people tuned into radio.
That's why Doug. I think that's why Doug has been so successful.
Mm-hmm.
Really, it is, because that's what people really want, is to be part of their community and to know that. And just this very sad incident, a young girl who was hit by a vehicle and passed away. And the outreach from people in the community shows that people do care, and that people really have an investment in their community. And that's what I loved about being able to do news in Kingston. When I started in Kingston 44 years ago, it was, or 45 years ago now, there was not an emphasis on the local news. Yes, it was covered, but it wasn't the first thing. It was always national news that took the lead in the stories that were done. And frankly, when I took over the news department at CKLC and Fly FM, which was at the time 98.3, Y98 they called it originally, I believe. It was kind of a lazy approach to what was going on in the community. So we changed all of that, and we even changed the timing of our news to a quarter to the hour and a quarter after the hour in the morning and in the afternoon. And it was after doing an analysis of when people moved and when they needed the news, and we tried to provide the news for them in packages so that they could arrive at their workplace knowing what was going on, and knowing that it was a very mobile thing. We knew that people listened in their vehicles, and that's how they wanted to hear the news. And there were many stories of people who waited in their vehicles. If we went past our time at the top of the hour, waited to hear the stories that they might have missed. So, and we tried to do that. We had major news packages of 20 minutes sometimes in the morning, and 6:45 and 7:45 in the morning. So we went 5 minutes past the top of the hour. And that was to do with ratings as well. If you kept people for an extra quarter of an hour, you got extra time spent listening.
Bonus points.
In ratings, yes, which helped us sell advertising.
One of the things that I think people don't realize is that with a newsroom in a city the size that Kingston is that you are a one-man show for the most part. Morning news people are on their own doing everything to get the news out.
For the past probably 20 years or so, you're absolutely right. Sometimes there would be another person if there was another station who had an exclusive news person, but oftentimes you would be providing the news for both radio stations if your company owned both stations, recording one newscast probably for the one and then doing the other live, and or vice versa. So yes, it was quite a responsibility. And I found a new audience when I did start doing the news on the country station in Kingston. I was doing news in the morning on KROCK, and that had become very popular. And they asked me if I would do it on the country station, so I did. And I put a lot of effort into that, and it paid off. And I found a whole new audience of people and became friends with many of those when I started working up in Godfrey with an artist who I worked for 5 years. And so I met many of those people in Aerosmith, Verona, and Hardington, places where we worked or where we bought our supplies. Mm-hmm. That was wonderful.
One of the things I noted, you're not from Kingston, you're from Toronto originally, correct?
Yes, I was born and I grew up in Toronto. I went to school in high school for grades 11 and 12 in the States, and then came back and took a year before I started college, and was a graduate of the first radio broadcasting program in Canada at Community College, Humber College in Toronto. And that was a fantastic experience as a student. And I left that, and I'd been working in music. I interned for a year at Chum FM in Toronto with a wonderful person, Benji Karsh, the music librarian there and music director. And I'd gone to school with Nancy Krant, who was the music director at Chum AM. So it was such a fantastic experience. She got into that job a year after she started college. And so she had 2 years in the industry and sort of knew her way around and helped me around in the station at Chum FM. And I was accepted there as a regular staff person. It was the most wonderful experience for a student, really. And so I worked there, and then I also worked part-time and was paid at CHIC in Brampton, and they had an FM station that became CFNY in Toronto, and was a rock station. Still plays rock music in Toronto, the 101.3 The Edge, I believe it's called. Mm-hmm.
What drew you to news?
Well, it was the first job that was offered to me full time out of college. And I thought, oh my goodness,
a paycheck.
You know, I had the opportunity as a summer student to work at the college radio station, and to be paid, we had to take 2 courses. And one of the courses was news writing and news announcing. So the person that we had teaching that was a stickler, fine journalist, and I learned a lot from that. So I thought, well, yeah, I would love that. And I love the idea of doing interviews and discovering things. And so I took that first job that came up. It was offered to me, and I took it. The funny story being that we had a mortuary sciences program at Humber College, and one of the students there lived in St. Thomas, Ontario, which was my first radio station as a news person, and overheard me talking about getting this opportunity to go to a job interview. And he and his friend gave me a ride there because they were going back on a Friday to spend the weekend, and he was going to be working for his dad at the funeral home. So I stayed friends with him while I was working in St. Thomas, and would go and visit him, and he had an apartment in the funeral home. So we had to be careful playing music too loudly if there were people coming to visit, visitations at night. But that was a great experience. I started out as a reporter, and I became the afternoon news person, and then that person quit in an argument with the news director, and I got their job, and then I wound up becoming eventually the news director there, and learned my whole idea, my whole concept in a job was to always be learning and to always be getting better and always be finding better ways to do things. And so it gave me that opportunity, and I just loved it. And the station owner, he would actually, he liked me for some reason. I think he kind of felt that I had something, and he brought me in and he would show me these big ledger books back in the days and no computers. And he had all the ledgers of the radio station, and he showed me everything because we had a profit sharing program there. So employees had an interest in the company and how well it did. And so I learned how difficult it was for a radio station to make money and how expensive it was to operate a transmitter and just the electricity bill for that and the studios and those kinds of things. And so it was a most wonderful experience doing that. John L. Moore was his name, and he and his partner owned the station and sold the rights to their frequency to CFTR and Rogers in Toronto. They had the 680 frequency, and they had a clear channel on 680 because they were the historic holders of that license. But they gave it up for $1 million, and they were given 1570 on the AM dial as their frequency, which, if anybody knows anything about that, it's a terrible place to be at the end of the dial.
Yeah.
And so that was a whole other story, but it was a great experience for almost 4 years there before I came to Kingston. And then the rest of my career has been in Kingston.
What brought you to Kingston? Was it just an opening you heard about and applied for?
I was kind of recruited. The station had been sold to the Waters family. Alan Waters was the owner of Chum Radio, and they weren't allowed to own the station. Chum wasn't allowed to own it, but his two sons and daughter owned it. And so his one son, Jim, was active at the station and became the manager of the station. And he recruited me and came to London to interview me. I remember taking the bus from St. Thomas into London and meeting him at the hotel and being interviewed. And then he called me a couple of days later and offered me the position. And I said, well, I can't do that without coming to visit. I don't know anything about Kingston. So he said, well, you'll be welcome to come. And we came, my wife and I came. And we'd only been married for a year. And we drove in, and I heard the radio station and I fell in love instantly. And I said, yes, I'll take that job. And from there, it was nonstop.
44 years in Kingston.
40,
yeah, not all at CKLC. Yeah.
No, 24 years at CKLC and Y FM. And that was such a wonderful experience because it gave me so many opportunities, opened so many doors. I got to interview fantastic people, cover every single thing, open up the community, helped open up the Canadian Forces base to people. There was back 45 years ago, there was a little bit of animosity, I think, between the military and the community over things, and people just didn't understand what went on at CF in Kingston. And so I got to meet some of the leaders at the base and suggested to them that they open up and let the media come, do interviews, and tell people what goes on there. And anything that they don't have to be secretive about, why not tell people? Yeah. And they started to understand that and how much economically it offered to the community. And I think that really opened up that way. And we, when I came, there was this, the Toronto Sun was doing these articles about the union of prison, the correctional officers union. And they were making claims about them doing overtime, particularly at Millhaven, and how the president of the union local there drove a Cadillac and was able to do all these things because they controlled the overtime there. And they had sort of a kind of a gang kind of thing where they forced people to take time off so that these certain people could work overtime. And it was quite a bizarre concept to me. And I tried to figure out whether this was true or not. Well, it happened to be that the person that lived across from me in Amherstview was a member of the union. And so I talked to him, and I went and I met with the guy who was supposed to be driving the Cadillac. Well, the Cadillac was about 10 years old, and it was kind of rusty and beat up, and he just liked this old Cadillac. And, yes, it was a Cadillac, but it wasn't anything special. It wasn't a brand new shiny thing that he bought with his overtime. And they explained things to me, and I got really involved in it. And with the back in those days, it was much easier to also talk to the administration at the prisons. And we became very connected. And we had, for example, the home phone numbers of most of the wardens of the penitentiaries. We could call them at home. The warden at Millhaven, I had his direct phone line in the newsroom. We allowed us to share it in the newsroom, a direct line to his office. And we, at one time, were phoned by hostage takers who had taken 3 nurses hostage at Millhaven. And we connected the phone call through our technology to the warden's direct line so that he could hear our discussions before we actually accepted the fact that we were going to talk to these inmates. And they asked for me to come out to negotiate for them because I'd been involved in the prison and some of the social groups that they had at the prison. Of course, I knew that the administration wouldn't allow me to go into the area and negotiate with them. But when I got there, they did take me in, and the head of security knew who I was and showed me everything, where they were. He took out the schematics of the prison, showed me where they had the sharpshooters were and everything. They had walls, double walls, and they in most areas where they could get people into these rooms where nurses and other people that may be exposed to inmates would be. So they were able to see these people, and they would have been able to end it kind of violently if they needed to. But the guys finally gave up. So those are the kinds of connections we were able to build, and I felt that doing those kinds of things was a particular use for the community to know what was going on and to be able to have the real story.
Now, those kinds of connections probably are part of the reason why you may have decided to stay in Kingston, as opposed to what a lot of radio people do, which is to move from station to station till they get to a big city.
Yes, I had a couple of opportunities, and every time I had those opportunities, the person I worked for asked me what I wanted if I was going to stay. And so the one time I wanted to rebuild the newsroom, and I did that twice. And so I was very privileged that way. And the second time, we made it into the most high-tech newsroom in the country for a radio newsroom. I worked for John Wright as the manager at the time, and he was very much into computers, and so was I. And he was one of the first people who ever had one of those little Mac computers, and he let me bring it home. And I sat with it on the floor, and it just had this, green display. It was just, you could type things on it and stuff. And but I was just so fascinated with it, and I knew that this was going to be the thing that really revolutionized what we did and made it so much easier for us to do our jobs. So we were one of the first 3 stations in the country to go to a completely computerized newsroom. We cut the cord and we went with a very small software company out of Kitchener. And the guy was selling his software all over Europe. And the Europeans were so far ahead of everyone else when it came to technology and the use of digital technology. So I was fascinated by that and became really involved in that sort of community. I went to visit them where they worked, and the top 2 softwares for radio, digital radio, were Canadian. Mm-hmm. And I was still working in news.
Long way from ripping teletype off the pins in the newsroom.
Yes, we had many of those. Because we had 2 stations, and I had the luxury of having a really great and dedicated news staff, but we had to use. At one point, we used teletype paper that had carbon between them, so we had 2 copies of everything because we had, basically 2 different newscasters on each station, and so we wanted to share all of that. But with a computer, you didn't have to worry about those kinds of things. We didn't use up half the trees in northern Alberta and British Columbia for the newsprint. It was terrible, the amount of newsprint we used.
Over your 44 years doing radio in Kingston, any particular stories, like 1 or 2 stories that stand out in your mind that left an imprint?
Well, yes, of course, the ice storm of 98. Most people sort of credit me with helping them get through it, but it was my staff that did all the work in that. I happened to be on the air at probably the most critical times, and was the one who started the off the broadcasting on that day and stayed there. But I think we all had a bit of PTSD from that. We worked almost 2 weeks nonstop in the newsroom, and then after that, I was able to give people time off. I was able to give them an extra week of vacation. I went to the management and convinced them that people needed the time to take, so we were able to do that. So that was, we felt like we were providing a great service. And 25 years before that, I had been in St. Thomas, and there was a very similar ice storm. So both times I got nominated as a Citizen of the Year for our coverage of those. So I kind of knew what I was getting into back then. When Diana, the Princess of Wales, came, that was such a privilege to be able to cover that. And I did some coverage for CJOH in Ottawa, the CTV station there, by satellite from the fire escape of the Holiday Inn in the mornings when the launch would come in and bring them into Kingston. You could get just the most perfect shot from that little fire escape there. And I knew the manager of the hotel, so he was the one who suggested it and said, you can get a fantastic shot from here. And so I did that several times, and I was front and center for every single event that she was at, and have some fantastic pictures. I registered as a photojournalist at the time so I could have a camera with me. And one of the first big events that I did cover was the Queen, when the Queen came and opened the Loyalist Parkway. Biggest story that we covered before that was the cost of the toilet facilities that they had to provide for her in Amersfoort. So that was an interesting thing, and we were able to get there and do that because we knew the judge and Judge Henderson and his property there. So I went with Ernie Sparks, and at that time he was a photographer for the Whig Standard, and we went together, and we were parked at their home and walked down their lawn to the spot, and got there before all the British media, who didn't like us very much. We were in their way.
What about people that you've had the opportunity to sit down and talk with, interview?
Oh, most of the political leaders, I'm not so excited about the politicians. I wasn't really a political person, but I did have some great interviews. Joe Clark was, I think, one of the most pleasant interviews I ever had with a politician, and that was before he ever became leader of the party. And met him at in Elgin County at the MP. There, I forget the MP's name. It was at his farm, but just had a wonderful interview with him at the time.
One of the things that we've sort of talked around during the course of this conversation is the importance of meeting people in your community, getting to know them, getting to know what they are looking for out of you, and making sure they know what you can help, or they can help you with. Community involvement seems to be something that radio station people over the years, in my experience, goes back in radio to the 70s and the 80s, so it goes back a ways. But I would imagine that the same still holds true these days, where a certain number of radio types do get involved in their community. In my experience, I haven't seen too many news people do that, but you would be, would you be an exception based upon your own experience?
I was encouraged when I first started out to join a service club, and that just really didn't feel like my thing. And so I didn't. But what I decided to try and do was to get to know people in the community by doing those outreach kind of things. So, for example, the police, I got to know almost everyone on the police force at one time or another by actually going there. And I went there every day. I went to their building. When I started in Kingston, police wouldn't talk to the media at all. They said they'd been burnt by the print media. I tried to discuss it with the police chief, and he was very hesitant to make any concession at all. So I brought ideas to him about things. I had read about how they had a program called Crime Stoppers in the United States. Community members made donations, and they offered up rewards for information about crimes that hadn't been solved. He was very interested. It was Chief Gerald Rice at the time. He was very interested in that, but he said, "Oh, we can't do that, though. I mean, we can't offer rewards. People will be turning in their brother for that kind of thing." I said, "No, it's this is how it operates," and he was interested. So I gave him. I printed off, had information from the American side. It was something that I had got, and so he got interested in that. Finally, he started to open up, and it opened up to everybody. And I convinced him that it was a good thing, and that they should have a media conference every day to tell people what was going on in the media. And that way they sort of had a chance to control at least some of the story. Mm-hmm. And Bill Hackett was one of the people. He's the former police chief. He became the police chief in Kingston and passed away recently. Fantastic person. And he would, the occurrence sheets, he would bring them in and he would give them to us. So we got to see everything that happened in Kingston and what the community was really like. So that got me interested in other things. So for this, for example, the Social Planning Council, it looked at all these kinds of things, and we did interviews with those people. I became involved in the health area because I thought, this is unprecedented. We have these two hospitals at the time that have now amalgamated into the Kingston Health Sciences Center, Hotel Dieu Hospital and Kingston General Hospital and the Providence Care. And but we had these facilities and the research at Queen's and everything. I was like, my goodness, this is unprecedented for a community of our size. And so I got involved in that, became a member of the District Health Council's Primary Care Committee. Part of the job that we did at that time was to try to assure that there were enough doctors, family doctors in the region. And as you may know, it's become a major problem that we don't have enough family physicians for the number of people that are looking for a family physician. And I've experienced it twice myself. And I did stories about that. So a lot of news people felt you'd have a conflict of interest if you got involved in these kinds of things. And I didn't really care about that. I wasn't going to be conflicted. I wasn't going to have myself convinced about anything that I felt wasn't right because I was a member of something. And so I got involved in also the economic development area through an organization called Advantage Kingston, which came out of the task force to save CFB Kingston. For people who don't know, at one point, the Canadian Forces base in Kingston was threatened with closure, and it was being planned. And the person in charge of the base, the commander of the base, became involved with the community and worked with the community to save the base. And along with our member of parliament and many other people, the unions that were involved and other people. So there was a large committee of people committed to saving the base. And when that was successful, the group of those people said, amalgamation was taking place where the two townships surrounding Kingston were being amalgamated into one as the city of Kingston. And so there was no economic development organization being operated by the city. And at that time, the provincial government of the day was cutting back on the public service. And as people may know who are familiar with Kingston, Kingston is a public service town. Many public service jobs. So jobs were being lost there. So I stepped up and said, I'd love to be a member of this committee. We wound up calling it Advantage Kingston, and the co-chair with me, after a period of time, the co-chair stepped down, and I asked if I could become the co-chair of the committee, and was nominated for the position. And the co-chair, the other chair was Smokey Thomas, Warren Thomas, the current president of the public service, the Ontario Public Service Employees Union.
One of the things I want to sort of wrap up with, and this is from extensive research that I've done on one of my major sources of information, and that's Facebook, as I've seen you wandering around town and taking pictures of various spots of the city. And to me, that typifies something that you have the opportunity to do now, is to take your time, look around, and sort of document, if you will, one of the reasons or some of the reasons why you've stayed in Kingston, is looking at the neighborhoods and the buildings, that sort of thing. Is that a conscious thing you're doing?
I started it just wanting to take some pictures of some unique architecture and trying to get some close-up pictures of gargoyles and various things carved in stone on places and that kind of thing. And then I just thought, well, hey, what is this place for? And what, who lived there? What did they do? Those kinds of things. And a lot of the buildings are public places. And I try, private homes, I hesitate to photograph because I think that's an invasion of privacy in a way. But lately, I've been kind of raised with churches, and so some of those have been churches that I've been fascinated with. And now I see all of these churches on my walks. And so I'm going to start posting photographs of those. Not so sure what I'm going to say about them, but I'm just curious. Religion isn't supposed to be so popular these days. But there's so many churches and so many different ones, and ones that are a little bit different from the regular stream of faiths, the Anglican and United Church and Catholic Church and those kinds of things, or Presbyterian and so many different ones. So I'm very interested in that. It's just a curiosity thing, I think.
Do you?
I like.
Do you know?
Juxtaposition.
Do you know Michael Myers, the singer?
I do know of him.
I would suggest, and this is just a suggestion, Mike Myers, when he's not singing, is walking around his neighborhood in town, taking pictures of landscapes and nature. And some of the pictures are quite interesting. And I'm thinking it would be a good companion piece to the kind of research that you're doing or kind of pictures you're taking. It's all of the same city, but he's focusing more on nature and trees and leaves. And I think he lives near a golf course, so he gets the opportunity to take pictures from far away. And it's just the idea of taking pictures of your hometown and posting them so other people can enjoy them as well. That sort of thing.
Yes, I quite like that. And I do like the stories behind things. And I've been fascinated to St. Mary's Cemetery and wondering about the stories of the people there. I'm very interested, and I've seen some of the stones from the people that I knew when I was when I first started out here. So and they have wonderful monuments there as well.
One of the things I've been totally impressed with, and it seems lately I've spoken with a lot of people who tell stories of the community. Brian Johnson is one fellow that I did a podcast with, and you hear stories of people and events that have happened in your community, and you may not be aware of them, or you may have forgotten. I mean, you've thrown out some names today that I remember now based upon having lived through them, but I've forgotten about the events.
Irene Mooney, who was really Kingston's first activist.
Yep.
She was known, we named her in our newsroom as the City Hall watchdog. She was just a citizen who went to every city council meeting and spoke her mind about the goings on at City Hall, and spoke out when she felt things were not being done in the proper way. And I can remember going to visit her at her home one time and having tea with her. That was the most wonderful experience with her, because I got to know her a little bit as a person, and where she lived and that kind of thing, and had so much respect for someone like that, who would speak up about the things that they felt were important. And so I think that we worked quite hard to give those people voices as well. And that's, I think, why people connected with it.
Oh, yeah.
So we were successful in that way. We became when I was at CKLC, we became the first source for local news. I was very lucky. Neil Reynolds was the editor of the Whig Standard, and he had a philosophy that the local news was in the second section. Right? Yeah. So it wasn't the first thing that was important. And that was his philosophy, and I understood it. I didn't believe it myself, but that gave us the opportunity to replace that. We had a wonderful newsroom and did extraordinary things, live broadcasts of almost everything. The sinking of a ferry, decommissioned ferry in the harbor in Kingston for a diving place. The tall ships, the first tall ships, where I think it's probably the biggest public event ever in Kingston. Hundreds of thousands of people lined the shores of Lake Ontario from Arrowsview all the way through Kingston and up through the Royal Military College to see this flotilla of tall ships, and we broadcast it live. I couldn't believe it. It was like, I don't know anything about a ship, but we had the curator of the Marine Museum, Ed Smith, I believe his name was, sitting next to me, giving this wonderful description of these. We had a person, one of our announcers, in a plane following it. We had someone else in a boat out with the flotilla of the ships. And it was just fantastic. We did all these things, and we were able to do it. And I think it gave an excitement to news that people hadn't had before.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
I was able to hire students in the summer and actually pay them as internships. So that was unusual. It was one of the only stations in the country that did that kind of thing. So I'm very privileged to have been able to do those things. And that's why I stayed here. Because, as I say, every time there was, an opportunity for me to move, I was offered, well, what would you like to do next? If you were going to stay here, what would you, and so they enticed me in, and it was great. And I had family, we had a daughter and liked the community.
Exactly.
Felt connected.
Yeah. You've made a great contribution to the community, Tony, and I certainly do appreciate all the time and the stories that you've shared today, and all the best to you going forward.
Thank you very much, Dave. I've enjoyed sharing some of these things with you.
All righty. Our thanks once again to Tony Orr, longtime radio news director at CKLC Y98 and KROCK Country 93.5. Hope you enjoyed the conversation. This episode was recorded virtually in early February 2022.
The theme music for the podcast is Stasis Oasis, written and performed by Kingston musician Tim Aylesworth. If you have any questions, comments, or suggestions about any of the episodes, please send a note to thekingstonianpodcast at gmail.com. For details on upcoming guests, follow us on Facebook. The Kingstonian Podcast is hosted by Dave Cunningham and produced in Kingston, Ontario, Canada.